in a span of 4 hours, somebody must have got wind of it. And I think there were like 20 memes created about this product that I made. And, it was like people were being like, who created this? Like people were like, in the Wolf of Wall Street, Leonardo DiCaprio was like spitting money off the boat. Like people were doing all this. And I was like, oh, wow. Like
And you were
this is,
still like under the radar too. Like you don't really put your name on stuff.
yeah, for the most part, right?
Cash flow? Cash flow? Did you clear your cash flow?
Yo, what's up, Mike? How you doing?
Hey, good man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hey, thanks for coming on today. It's awesome to do this. We've been working together at different levels for I don't know 3-4 years now, and I really love what you're doing.
Yeah, no problem, man. Yeah, funny enough, this is actually my first podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Cool.
it's funny. I've been doing this for so long, but just been kind of like staying under the radar for so long. So I was kind of I was running just before this, and I'm like, what am I even going to talk about? Haven't been through the circuit here before. So appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, let me do a quick intro for you. So I'm going to tell a story about how we met. It
Sure.
all starts with me clicking on a Google ad back in like 2019. I was building out the cold email at my company, the outreach, sales outreach program. And at the time, I was using Lemlist to do email warming.
Right.
We were using GrowBots for all of our outbound sending, but we're using Lemlist to warm inboxes. And it's like, I forget, it was like $100 per month per inbox or something crazy. And I just used that one feature. It was that email warming feature. And they're the only company at the time that had email warming. So I'm like pissed off. I'm spending all this money, keeping my inboxes down to like 2 or 3 and spending a crap load on inbox warming. And so I was Googling one day. So I'm Googling and all of a sudden this thing, Warmup Inbox pops up. So I'm like, oh, this is awesome. $9 a month. So I fill out the form, you and I jump on a Zoom and you're like, yeah, you like that? Yeah, I'm thinking about building it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly, man. Yeah, you were like, I think customer number two
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
time.
that was
So
awesome. So yeah, we still use your product. I know you sold it, and that's an awesome story to get into. But what else? I just kind of skipped right to the warm up inbox part. I know you had a part of your journey before that, so you want to just kind of like share your
yeah, man.
bio as well.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, I guess you kind of jump right to the end, but what's kind of nice, like specifically with Warmup Inbox, it really was kind of like an overnight success, just mainly like 6 years in the making. So, I used to work in sales, so graduated college, worked for a company called TransPerfect, and basically they were a translation company. So, talking to lawyers, doing sales, and kind of learned how a well like oiled machine would work specifically for a company that was scaling. So for example, when I joined, they were doing like 200 million in sales, and now they do over 1 billion a year in sales. So pretty large company. And I was kind of a cog in a gear specifically for that engine, and
And you were doing
decided,
outbound there.
yeah, so a lot of outbound calling, kind of cold email, things like that.
So
And
like SDR or AE
Yeah,
or
basically the way that it was structured was you started as an account manager, kind of learning and working under a director. So kind of helping them get projects done and going on sales calls and essentially being shadowed. And then you kind of slowly work through the ranks. So went from like account manager to account executive, where you kind of started your own book of sales, and then going to director. So and kind of over time there, I realized, like, yes, it's a well-oiled kind of machine specifically for kind of scaling translations. And I kind of sat there and I was like, well, okay, like I feel like I can do this myself, just kind of in a smaller scale. I decided not necessarily to do it with translations, but I kind of basically was able to like sell the product, and then also kind of see behind the scenes of like how the company fulfilled their translation. So it was really understanding how this company kind of scaled up. And so kind of around the time that I started to think about starting my own company, I actually got recruited to work at a startup in New York City. So the company raised millions of dollars, raised their Series A, and I was brought on to actually partially head up their like SDR team. So managing a couple of SDRs and kind of quote unquote like scaling, a Silicon Valley startup. And I got there and realized that we really didn't have like product market fit. So we had all this money. Everybody had great salaries and we had an amazing product. We actually did eye tracking through computer web cameras. So helping kind of consumer packaged goods companies really just be able to tell what stuck out on the shelf.
So wait, was that one that was supposed to like fly under the radar for the consumers, or was that something like you're in a study and we're tracking your eyes and
Yeah.
happening?
So everything was kind of in like an experimental phase, meaning like everybody whose eyes we tracked, opted into it, knew their computer web camera was on and things like that. So it was kind of like a closed environment, but really it was just designed for consumers packaged goods. And what they were doing was literally getting like hardware on their face and bringing people in. And it was really expensive. You're talking about experiments that were hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the company I work for, it's Sticky, we brought it on a computer web camera and we would take $100,000 tests and bring them down to $100.
So it wasn't like eye tracking, so was it eye tracking on websites or applications, or was it eye tracking on like actually looking at like real, IRL products in real life?
So we didn't do in real like life viewing. That was more for like the glasses, but we would like display a shelf digitally to kind of show, what it might look like in a store. We also did like UX UI testing for that as well. And, specifically for websites and things like that. So it was like a really cool product. And basically it was just something where we couldn't really find like the perfect audience, right? So the consumer packaged goods companies were having a hard time switching over because they really thought the value was the consumer walking through a grocery store versus just kind of like a mock-up on a computer. So basically we got there and we tried to scale up very quickly and realized that, it wasn't, kind of like an immediate home run. So that company ended up getting acquired. So there was some, good outlook for that company. But
I laughed earlier because it's like that's like the stereotypical, nerds in Silicon Valley or wherever trying to like find a business market for their solution or like for their tech.
Yeah. And so I was kind of like, I kind of saw both sides of the coin, right? So like at my company at TransPerfect, it was like this amazing company. The culture was epic. Like I'm still friends with people from there 7-8 years later. And it's an amazing company. It's an amazing like training organization for sales teams. Like, it was, it's just like, it's still one of the best. I deal with companies all day long now, and it's still one of the best companies that I've ever dealt with. To kind of on the flip side of like, a Silicon Valley company where there's, just like a lot of politics and all of that. And so I was like, okay, so I've seen an amazing company and I've seen a really bad company. And so now I'm kind of like, okay, well, I think I can kind of like nail in between that, right? So the cool part about TransPerfect was that it was really entrepreneurial, meaning they just kind of like threw you in the fire. They would give you a playbook and show you success, but they really made you go out and get your own book of business, right? So I worked down there in DC. I didn't really know a soul, just a couple of, I moved there when I was 22 and knew a couple of people from college, but that was it. But over time really grew like a book of business to hundreds of thousands, almost like $1 million just from nothing. But that was from, having kind of that playbook. And so they taught me, a lot there. And so, over time I realized, okay, I want to start out and kind of do my own thing. And so at Sticky, I saw kind of the technology side. And then at TransPerfect, it was more services side. And so I said, hey, why don't I take some of my experiences from both and merge them into kind of some sort of product. So I decided to start a assistant company. So it was called Byron. It's highbyron.com. It's still running today. And basically what it was is that you would sign up, put in your credit card, and within an hour you would have access to what's called like a virtual assistant. So basically somebody who is sitting at home working here in the US, really just doing a lot of like admin tasks. So, scheduling meetings, calling and booking appointments, clearing out your email and things like that. And so virtual assistant space is really competitive. And so really the competitive advantage that I had was that it was a platform. So not necessarily kind of like a SaaS company, but mostly around just making things easier. So it was kind of like tool based. So it's like you would sync like your calendar and the assistant would have better transactions, visibility within that. We had live chat within the platform. So it was really geared towards kind of like short-term and long-term tasks. Short-term tasks, you can like literally type a request in and it would be done in 20 minutes just by whoever was online. And then we'd have long-term tasks where we were really just like dedicating assistance to you for whatever you needed. A lot of time was like recurring tasks. And so kind of going back, my experience was in sales, right? So like I didn't at the time I didn't know how to code. I just basically drew things on PowerPoint and I was like, hey, can you like make this clickable? Right. So I knew like what customers wanted.
So you got developers though, like you hired like offshore developers or something, and
Yeah, exactly. So basically, I kind of had a couple of different nightmares. So at first I hired a guy off Upwork. I was like really adamant that it was, I'd find somebody in the US because they would be quote unquote like better developers. And so I found a guy and he's like, sure, I'll do it for like a flat fee of like, I think it was like 3 or 4 grand. And I was like, oh wow, like sounds good. And so I just like put up all these mock-ups and he basically ghosted me. He built like half of it and it turned out it was like horrible code. And so I decided to hire a firm in Ukraine, and I still am friendly with that firm today. So this was around like 2015, 2016. And really what they did was they took this guy's code that was basically complete garbage. Like at the time, he just kind of ghosted me and I had this code base. It was so bad that they literally couldn't get it running on a local computer. And so like literally it took a week for them just to get it running on the local computer. And so I did fall into this trap.
what
Like,
was the tech stack they did it in? Or the
ooh,
first guy?
it was Angular. And so like literally it
Just
like
front end only? No back end?
like no idea what the back end it was. That's like how kind of like I had no idea what was going on at the time, right? It was basically like it they had the code base, like I had access to the code base, so it was just making sure that like code was being pushed when they said it was being pushed. But yeah, it was one of those things where I just was like, okay, if I click a button and it works, like perfect, and honestly sometimes still to this day I act that way. But yeah, so I definitely in that time kind of fell into the like, okay, one more feature and all of a sudden this company is going to blow up, right? So like I just kept building and building and building. So the company in terms of revenue for Byron, like at height, basically because it was services based, like churn was horrible. So like we'd have crazy months and then really low months. But we were doing like a couple $100,000 in sales like at the peak. And then I just kind of like slowly gave up because it was such a burn. Mainly because you're just essentially dealing with like, human capital. Really, it's people have so many different personalities, different ways of working. So, for example, somebody might type in a request and say 2 sentences, hey, set up my entire CRM and get it ready in 3 days, right? And that's all. And then if an assistant would come back with a list of 10 questions, they would come back and be like, you have no idea what you're doing, or whatever it may be, right? They expect things to be done. But on the flip side, we'd have amazing clients that, would have amazing kind of briefs and scripts or whatever it may be. And those were the clients that we were trying to filter out. And so I worked on that idea for like 4 years and I just kept trying to get it to some sort of like scale, right? Like, and so honestly, basically what started to happen over 3 or 4 years was I kept reinvesting every single dollar into development. And Yeah, essentially we got to a point where
So how were you making money at the time? Like, did you have a job or what were you doing?
I was consulting on the side. So basically I was like, I would say I was like a sales advisor. So I started, like I consulted for some companies,
Was that
mainly around,
Lead Labs you had?
well, so I started that basically, like that was like the parent company that I started consulting with. So basically what kind of started to happen was Byron was making like a couple $1,000s a month, and I was just like, man, I was spinning my wheels. And at the same time, those couple of $1,000s a month, I was reinvesting in the developers just to keep building more features, hoping it would blow up. And so basically I was consulting for like some serious like Series A, Series B companies like that you would know now. And really it was stuff that I learned at Sticky and TransPerfect, like how to script good cold emails, how to find contacts. So like Clearbit today is like one of the biggest lead generation companies in the world, but I was the point guy. I was one of Clearbit's first customers back at Sticky when we had kind of these like Silicon Valley connections. And, I was like, oh, you just run a script and you're able to get all these contacts and do outreach. Don't you know this? And even some of these Series A seed stage companies that I was working with didn't really
So
know that.
what size was Clearbit? Like how big was their sales team and how big was
I
their
think it was like 3 or 4 people at the time.
wow. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
crushing it these
Basically,
days.
oh, of course, yeah. I mean, they're huge now, but at the time they were like, hey, yeah, we'll give you access, open access to our API, go nuts. And like now today, that would be, a $300,000 a year plan or something like that.
Yeah, and they had no clue like how to do cold outreach at the time, and they were just like completely in the dark, or they were doing it wrong, or
Well, no. So Clearbit knew exactly what they were doing. It was more, I was able to. So, for example, like Aaron Ross, one of the like cold email OGs, right? He helped consult at the company that I work for, right? So, like the sales team went to Aaron Ross's house, and we had all this kind of like inside knowledge of cold email, right? So in 2016, we were getting, every 100 emails we were sending, even though we didn't really have product market fit. I mean, we were getting 10 to 15% positive reply rates. I mean,
you told me that when we were
yeah,
out at dinner that one night, and I was just I can't even fathom other than like recruiting emails, I can't even fathom
it was
10%.
unbelievable,
Yeah, it's
man.
insane.
And it didn't even necessarily have to be personalized. It was just like because there was less noise, through email. And so basically because Byron, this company I started, wasn't like taking off the way I wanted to, I still, I lived in New York, but I lived in like a really small apartment. But yeah, man, I mean, it was like the definition of a grind, right? So Byron was making a couple $1,000s a month. During lunchtime, I would actually walk dogs. So like I lived on the Upper East Side, and like the best part about New York City, right, is like my apartment was $2,000 a month. And I mean, literally right next door was a $2 million apartment, right? Like there's like the split between it was amazing. So
Dude, I freaking love that story, man. That's the
yeah,
coolest. Like working on the app, like consulting, and then like walking dogs to just like
yeah. I
pay your
mean,
rent, man.
if you were
That's
actually to focus walking dogs in New York, you can make 6 figures. So like I would sprint from apartment to apartment, and I would only take 1 hour for lunch, even though I work for myself in my apartment. And I mean, I was pulling in like $150 cash a day just walking like a couple of dogs. It was amazing. So it was a really like fun time too, because while I was outside walking these dogs, I was really kind of working through these like startup problems. But I definitely got into this kind of entrepreneur issue of like, man, like if I build this feature, like all of a sudden it's going to open up this whole market and I'm going to start making like millions of dollars, right? And obviously that didn't happen. And so one day I always listen to podcasts when walking dogs, and somebody I listened to, I forget what podcast it was, but they were basically like, they're like, this person makes 150 grand a year off Fiverr, like just like making illustrations. And I'm like, well, my goal was just to make $100 a year or 100 grand a year just working for myself. So I'm like, well, why don't I just do that, right? I mean, why like try to like scaling like a SaaS company or a services company when like I'm making a good amount of money consulting on cold email. Um, and so I decided to kind of spin up an agency, and I call that agency Lead Root. And basically, what I was doing when I was consulting, I was just kind of doing hourly, but I realized that if I can like almost like Fiverr productize a service, I can kind of scale that and just like repeat. And so,
What year are we in at this point?
yeah, probably like 2017, give or
Okay.
take. And so that's what I started to do, and that really started to work, right? So I was charging like $2,500 a pop for like basically for a month, recurring, to find leads, craft like email copy, reach out to them, and then literally schedule meetings. And so basically what I did at first was, I started building tools to basically bring my margins down. So at first I was almost doing everything at cost. So I'd pay like a data broker, like $1,500 to find the leads. I had all these email tools to send out emails. And then like I had one of my buyer and assistants schedule the meetings. And all of a sudden I look and I'm like, well, I'm not making that much money, but if I can scale this, I'll start to make some money. And so kind of around that time, Byron was like, I started focusing my time on the agencies. So Byron was starting to kind of go down in sales, and literally I ran out of money. It was kind of like I was scrambling. I mean, at that time, honestly, I think I was like $20,000 or $30,000 in credit card debt,
Wow.
and I had student loans. So really, what I was doing was I was putting all developer expenses on my credit card, and then I was also like the cash I was getting from dog walking was paying the rent.
Were you married
And
back then?
I wasn't, but my girlfriend, now wife at the time, we were together, I guess at that time, 5 or 6 years. And yeah,
You
she
just
was,
like, what the hell are you doing, man? Or
yeah, man. Yeah. She's amazing that way. Cause it was a lot of faith, right? So like at this time, I was not saving money, and now I was like 3 or 4 years into like the scramble of like trying to start a company, right? Like I would, she knew I had like skills like in sales, right? Like, I mean, when I actually worked at a normal job, I was crushing it, and making like really good money, especially for my age at the time. But yeah, when you went out on your own, she was like, oh, like you got this huge sale. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to invest every penny back into development. And so kind of the issue was,
the other thing too, just to go back a
yeah,
second. So like you said earlier, like, yeah, I could have made 6 figures walking dogs in New York. So if that was all you wanted, just to make 6 figures and didn't care how, you would have just walked dogs. But I don't think, like, you're not a consulting type of guy. Like, I don't think you want to go and like bill hours. I don't think you want to walk dogs. Like, what I know about you is that you've got, these like visions for, products. And that's just quick side tangent there. But I think that plays into what you're talking about here.
right. And we'll get to it. I do think kind of the story tells a lot, because, I'd say maybe we're 20 minutes into talking, and literally at this point, I was tens of thousands of dollars in debt and had no faith of like kind of what's going on. And so Byron was still making a little bit of money. And at that point, like basically my credit card was maxed out. Like I literally called the bank and they're like, yeah, we're not going to give you any more money. And so at that time, I was literally forced to start coding to fix bugs that were in the platform. So I put the Ukraine development team on hold. And so I'm coding and fixing Byron, and just like learning by trial and error. And then at the same time, I'm building the Lead Root agency. And so as I kind of started to learn how to code, I started building my own scrapers and kind of dashboards that kind of help make the agency more efficient. And that's really kind of how I started to learn how to code. And that really just all of a sudden like opened my eyes, right? I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm really able to kind of like double, triple my efficiency if I just like start writing a couple of lines of scripts for, like one-off tasks, right? It might be, cleaning up an email list before sending for a client, or, finding a crawler to just go to Google and compile a list of phone numbers.
What were you coding in?
So I know Node.js. That's
Okay.
like my bread and butter. And like MongoDB. And that's honestly, that's like my only tech stack. And
That's
like
cool. That's a
I
good,
just know like
good
how to
stack.
work with that. And then I know I don't know a lick of front end, like sure some HTML, CSS, but so I specifically work with like a front end developer now for those types of things. And um so yeah, so I started running the agency, and so I started selling like data plans. So I was like, oh, okay, I now have a script to crawl Google Maps, for example, like by location. And so like I was starting to sell like really big projects. Like, you know, a startup in London came to me and said, hey, we're looking for every single retail location in the world that isn't a chain, and we want their email address and phone number, right? If you Google that today, still, you literally can't find that. That list doesn't exist. You need like a private broker. The nice part about that was for a project beforehand, I figured out a way to crawl Google Maps for data for a client. And so, literally running a script for 2 days, I was able to make $40,000 in like a couple of weeks, just like compiling that script. And so, that was kind of like when my eyes started to open and say, whoa, like I can really start to leverage this code for like some serious money.
So
And
we're still
so,
in 2017 here, right?
yeah, to that, like I'd say, like over the next couple of years, like 2017 to 2019, it was
Okay.
kind of like, okay, still grinding, still working on Byron.
But you got the credit cards paid off, and like you're starting to
Yeah,
kind
so
of
like
see the.
things started around that time. I got engaged. Funny story about that was like, you know, I still was basically the moral of the story was I was reinvesting every single dollar. But right around that time, like the beta of Stripe Capital came out, and literally I took a loan out on Stripe Capital to buy my engagement ring. So this like around this time, it was literally like I still had no money, so I literally leveraged my monthly recurring revenue off Byron to get an engagement ring. So like this is kind of still how scrappy things were.
I love that story. That's
Yeah, man.
diehard startup founder story.
Yeah, and like I mean, as you can tell, it's like it's pretty stressful, right? So like now looking back, it kind of sounds like, oh, those were like the glory days. But I don't know. I at the time, like I gained 30 pounds. I went to the ER twice specifically because like I thought I was like having a heart attack. It was just
Yeah.
like doctors like, hey man, you're 26 years old, like you're okay. You know. And so yeah, things started to get better, right? So like the consulting and productized services started to scale, right? So I grew my lead generation agency to about 30 or $40,000 a month, like recurring. And that was essentially by myself with just a couple other contractors. So I was really starting to like kind of quote unquote print money. But the issue was that churn was pretty bad, meaning I would get a client for like say $2,000 or $5,000 a month, and like we'd set some meetings for them, and then they'd be like, great, we either have a ton of meetings or like, you know, we wouldn't set as many meetings as they thought. And so basically we were just like every 2 months, 3 months, it was just like the clients just kept coming and going for whatever reason. So sometimes it was like we would set 25 meetings in a month, and they're like, well, we want 50. And I'm like, well, we'll just give you 25 for now. And like I change up the model of like pay per performance and things like that. And again, I started realizing like, okay, I'm dealing with a lot of different personalities and different sales quotas. And I almost got back into this like Byron phase of my life where it was just like dealing with people again, right? It was just like one of those things where even though I was trying to get productized services, I still couldn't kind of hone it in. And so kind of around that time, I realized like we were building these internal tools and like reinvesting in kind of the infrastructure. So we were building like data crawlers and email sending tools and things like that. And I realized like some of the client complaints, even around churn, was spam, right? And so, say we send like 100 emails, you know, we would only get like one or two replies instead of like in 2016, we would get like 50 replies, right? And so what I realized was basically our emails were going to spam. And this was, I guess, 2019, 2020. And at the time, there were only two solutions. It was like Lemlist and a tool called, I guess it was called Mailwarm.
Yeah,
And
mail warm.
Mailwarm, yeah,
Yeah,
and they were a
$500
YC company.
for like 3 inboxes per month.
was both were so expensive. And I remember stumbling across Lemwarm and being like, wow, like they basically invented this concept, the lemless guys. It was like, I came across it. I'm like, this is genius. I'm like, I can't believe I didn't think about this. And because I've been entrenched in the cold emails.
So back up. Most people here, probably most of the listeners, aren't going to be like cold email gurus. So just talk a little bit about, I'm happy to chime in here too, but talk a little bit about like what is warming up inboxes, why do you do it, how to email and ISP service providers filter and spam messages, and just sort of like the strategy behind what this all is.
Sure. Yeah. So the concept around cold email is, say you're selling a product, whether, it's services, your software, basically you're a company, and you have like an ideal customer profile, right? So we can use an example of like, hey, I'm a sales rep at a recruiting software firm where it helps recruiters manage their applicants, right? I might be a salesperson there, and I know that every single recruiter in the United States could potentially use my tool. So I'm going to send them an email out of the blue. I might not know them. I might not have kind of like a current connection with them, but I know they're kind of within my field, and I know their title. Like, we have similar customers and similar use cases. And so if I email them, it's not going to be completely out of the blue. Yes, I don't know them, but it's going to be like somewhat hyper personalized, meaning, I'm going to say, hey, we work with customer X. We help, streamline recruiting efficiencies by 10X. Are you open for a demo? Basically, it's a B2B reach out, so it isn't something like, reaching out about, weight loss or something like that to just a list of like a million emails. It's more focused on saying, okay, let's say there's 100,000 recruiters in the United States. Like, that's your total addressable market. Over the next like 6 months, I'm going to try to reach out to every single one. And so basically what companies do, especially like startups, is they use cold email tools to kind of personalize things. So they'll upload a list, almost like a mail merge, and it'll say hi, person's first name, use case. And so it'll almost be like a boilerplate, but it'll be customized per each person. And literally it's sending one-on-one emails, making it look like you emailed that person just like by hand typing it. And it's really effective. It's still effective even today. It was effective. It was super effective many years ago. But it's still great today. And so the issue is like, so for a big company, right? So like the first company I worked for, TransPerfect, there's like, I think they have 8,000 employees now, which means their email sending reputation is amazing. They're emailing clients every day. They're emailing customer support questions. There's millions of emails going through that corporation a day. Google and Microsoft is looking at these emails and saying, hey, they're from TransPerfect. Like, TransPerfect's legit. Accept the email and bring it into the inbox. Okay. So big companies don't necessarily have like what's called an email deliverability issue.
And not just Google and Microsoft, but you also have like, Comcast and
there's
internet service providers in there as well.
There's like 200, maybe 300 email service providers out there. And so basically every single one has their own way of filtering spam. Nobody knows, even like today, like nobody knows how Google filters out spam. It's basically like trial and error. And so the big issue though is that startups who might have one or two employees don't have this like built up reputation. And so if you start just like blasting or emailing recruiters, Google's going to say, we have no idea who you are. And it's just going to immediately go to spam. And so all this time and effort that you're spending on researching contacts, writing personalized messages, it literally won't even matter because it's just going to go to the spam box. And so basically what Warmup Inbox does, and basically these tools that Lemless created, or this concept that Lemless created, was that you would build up a network of inboxes that would talk to each other. It was basically a closed loop network. So I sync my email, Brian, you sync your email, and then it's just going to send emails back and forth between me or you. And if an email lands in spam, we're going to mark it in the inbox as, hey, this isn't spam. And the idea is that you're reversing
And it's automated. Like we're not doing this. It's not like a group where we set it up and just do it like as friends. It's like actually all automated as a platform.
Right. And honestly, at the time there were and maybe still are services that would do it by hand. They would literally have assistants like overseas do it. And so that was the time. It was like Lemlist had this concept, and it didn't really work that well. It was just an idea. And then you had the manual process. And so basically the whole idea is that by moving it from the spam to the inbox, you're retraining the Google, Microsoft, and all these other providers' algorithms and saying, hey, Mike and Brian's emails are good. And so basically that's what Lemlist kind of discovered. And so going back to my agency, I was spending Lemlist, I think at the time was like $50 or $70 per inbox. And so at the time I had like maybe 200 inboxes. So I was spending so much money on warming these inboxes. And it was a fight between like landing and spam, client churn, and like, yes, the agency was printing money, but I was also spending so much money on tools and building up infrastructure. So
dude, hold on, let me just do the math on that. So I think you're right. I think it's like 70,
it was like
$9 or something.
It was a lot of money.
150. You're spending 10 grand a month on Lemlist. And were you using it for sequencing, or were you just using it for the warm-up feature?
No, at the time I kind of had I guess we were using Mailshake at the time. And we were using Lemlist for warm up. And I was like, this is nuts. Like,
that's insane. 10 grand a month on warming inboxes.
Yeah. And something you haven't even covered is like everything I've done is 100% bootstrapped. Everything I'm going to talk about is 100% bootstrapped. Like, basically around the time I was still like paying off some credit cards, but overall like things were moving in the right direction. But I was like, my margins aren't that great between paying for assistance and paying for these tools. And so I had the hardest part about this kind of warming up concept is you need like a seed set network, meaning like you need to start with the inboxes. If it's just me and you, Brian, talking to each other, it basically does nothing. You need to have diversity. And so basically in 3 days, I built this tool and I called it Warmup Inbox, just because the domain wasn't there. And so over the years, I kind of learned like how SEO worked. And I was like, okay, like, this term warming up has existed for a couple of years, but not the term like warming up your inbox. So basically I coined that. And in 3 days, I built kind of an MVP with my own network. And for a couple of months, I was just like working. It was for my own use. And I noticed that it was starting to work. I was like, wow. I had different clients. So it was on different IP addresses. So it worked out really well. And, at the time I was like, let me put like a sign up page on here in case I want to start selling it.
So I remember when you launched it, I signed up for it. I saw your Google ads and signed up for it, and it worked like passably well in the beginning. And I remember that like there was bugs and like inboxes would get disconnected, and I'd email you, and like 15 minutes later you'd be like, push the fix, try again. Like it was working. It was awesome. Right. Like great customer service, by the way.
Well, yeah, it's because you were like one of 3 users, So
but by like the second or third month, like I could just see like hockey stick effect where it went from like working well enough to like it was really working. Like I could literally see it in our reports.
Yeah. And like at that time too, I was also starting and stopping a bunch of different companies. So like I tried to start my own dog walking company. That didn't work. Tried my own backpack
you did
company.
Do the dog thing.
Yeah, I tried. I was like, let me, I just tried like anything that would work. And so like I would spin up some landing pages, run Google ads, and like just look at the metrics and see if anything worked, and like things would fall flat. And then with Warmup Inbox, I started running Google ads. So at the time, it was just my own network, and I started running Google ads. And like, for example, you were one of the first users that came in. And I started looking at the metrics, and I was like, okay, 10 people clicked on the Google ad, 6 people signed up. And out of those 6 people, 5 of them like are begging to pay for the credit, like putting the credit card in. I didn't even have a credit card form. I just had like a sign up page. And that's when I realized I was like, oh my gosh, these like metrics are through the roof, right? So at Sticky, we were always optimizing for like funnels of like, visitor hits the website. Do they sign up for like a free account? What do they do in the free account? Do they actually use it? And then do they put in their credit card? And then do they stay? And so I kind of had that drilled in my head, and I looked and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like one of the best funnels I've seen to date, right? And so all of a sudden I put everything on pause and start working on Warmup Inbox. And that's kind of part of the reason why, for example, if you when you would send me an email in the early days, that's the power of like building something yourself is, if a customer asks for something, they can literally, if you can reply in 15 minutes with a fix, that's like really powerful. And you have a customer for life and, a friend and now, a podcast host and podcast opportunity, right?
Look at that. It's amazing how the world works.
Right. And like the best part, about you and like my experience with you was you literally sent me an email and said, "Hey, Mike, like your tool's cool. It's really cheap." And that was part of the reason why I wanted to do it. I was like, okay, if I can make this 10x cheaper and a little bit better, like I'll be able to get this whole market. And, that was a theory and it worked and is kind of now core to all my other businesses now that I own. But yeah, it was one of those things where you sent me an email and you were like, if you build these 10 things, like I will pay. And I just coded for a week straight and you lived up to your word. And luckily that was like the core feature set that helped that company grow so quickly. So,
I remember we had that first Zoom call or whatever, Hangouts or whatever it was. And so you're like, yeah, I'm thinking about building this. And then the next day you're like, all right, here's the wireframes. What do you think?
Yeah.
And then like we had another meeting or something, went through some of the wireframes. And then it was like, yeah, a week later, you're like, all right, it's built. Go ahead and sign up.
Right. And so it's, for kind of like an average person, right? Like if you're starting from scratch, like with a software idea, it might not take a week, right? Part of the reason why I was able to move so quickly was, I had 6 years experience of drawing mock-ups for Byron, starting to code. But Warmup Inbox was literally the first like full-blown app that I built, right? So like at the time I wasn't necessarily building too many endpoints and like back-end endpoints. I was more building scripts for crawling and
it's one of those like beautiful business ideas that it's like catching lightning in a bottle. They only come across every so often where it's just like so simple. Like there's not many moving parts. You don't need like some crazy data set to pull it off. And it's just, the features are simple, but it just creates like massive value for the users.
Yeah. And there was all these like buzzwords that was going on in my head. It was like network effect, right? It's like part of the reason why Facebook is so successful is, because of the network. And I was like, okay.
It reminds me of Calendly. Like Calendly is another example where it's like this epic business that's just so freaking simple. Like the product is so simple. It's not hard to build, I mean, I'm sure at this point they have a lot of engineering into it, but it's not hard to build Calendly. Like that's the MVP of Calendly.
Yeah, with Warmup, there were some scaling issues because we were growing so quickly. And just like to put a sense of the numbers. So, I started it, I used it internally for a couple months, and then I put like a paywall up. And within like 11 or 12 months, it went from 0 users to thousands of paid users, and like a significant amount of revenue. With only me, my brother, a front-end developer, and then towards the end, we hired a marketer to just kind of help with some of the marketing efforts. But it was we had some scaling issues, and part of the reason, like part of the issue was, dealing with IMAP and SMTP, which is like an email client. It allows you to kind of connect to mailboxes, or it allows you to connect to kind of any kind of mailbox. That technology is so like basically old and it really hasn't changed for so long. And there are just like all these little nuances that, especially as like a beginner intermediate developer, was really difficult to deal with. And so, essentially what we were doing was retraining Google and Microsoft's algorithms. There were some other providers, but, it was kind of this gray area of like, is Google catching on to this? Granted, at the time, we were running Google ads and building up SEO. And because we were the first company to literally focus only on this in the US, our SEO just went through the roof, right? So like anything related to Warmup, we were ranking number 1. And I recognized that really early based off like my past experience. So literally like my brother, he came on as a content writer and customer support. And I mean, he he was writing like 2 articles a day, and you compound that over 100 days. I mean, you're talking hundreds of articles.
Well, two things I'll say there. Well, actually, one thing, and then I have a question for you. I get what you're saying because yeah, Google like could shut you down. They could just be like, all right, no more API access for you, and just shut the whole thing down. But they themselves do tons of cold emailing. I get emails from Google all the time, so that would be like so hypocritical.
Yeah, and so part of the issue, and one thing I didn't realize, right? So like, I even like thought about raising money for Warmup Inbox, and at the time, actually got accepted to like a pretty well-known incubator. And when I applied, like we were at 3,000 MRR, and then when I talked to the partners, we were at 10,000 MRR, and that was like a week later. And I was like, oh my god, like by the time we got a term sheet, it was just like double, triple. And I was like, okay, like it literally doesn't make sense to make like to take this money anymore. And it was just one of those things where the growth was so quick. And part of the reason was I didn't realize that building multiple inboxes was a thing, right? So like for my cold email clients, like we would have 1 or 2 email addresses that would send out emails. And like out of nowhere, like I was charging $9 a month per mailbox. And then like out of nowhere, like people would come in with like 100 mailboxes and be like, oh my God, you're saving me just like my agency, like tens of thousands of dollars a month. And they'd be like, please take my money. And like out of nowhere, like, I would just wake up in the morning and like we would be making $2,000 to $5,000 a month extra per day. I mean, it was like truly unbelievable. I'll never forget the time like I was talking to a cousin-in-law, and we're talking at a party, and like he's like, oh, what are you up to? And we were talking for 10 minutes, and he's like, wow, that business sounds amazing. And I'm like, yeah, it's pretty nuts. And like I just pull out my phone, and there's 5 Stripe notifications in the 10-minute window that we were talking through. So the growth was pretty massive. And it was just because nothing out there existed in such a cheap fashion that was so simple. And so people just like love the simplicity of it. And really basically what kind of happened was we had like 50 or 100 clients, and then all of a sudden kind of like the Twitter cold email world found it, and it kind of went mini viral like in this kind of cold email world. So this kind of virality on Twitter, I put a affiliate marketing program in really early, just because people that like kind of the cold email world kind of lived off that, like on the Twitter.
The cold email wizard.
Yeah, basically, right. So it's like, he was like referring, there was just so many different people. Like it was, there were memes of like, you ever see the Spider-Man meme where they were to like, all the Spider-Man are pointing to each other at the same time. Yeah. And it was like, whose Warmup network like URL are we going to use?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it was one of those things where like, you say it out loud, and like, okay, like it took me 3 days to build something that, in the end, like I sold it for millions of dollars. It is truly amazing to kind of sit back and look and say, hey, this simple concept, grew so quickly. But it was a mixture of like, okay, I came up with a concept of immediate pain that I had, built kind of an MVP, talked to prime users like yourself, built those features that the user said, and then had 1 or 2 marketing channels that worked. And then once I found those, like I just like lived and breathed those marketing channels. And then you kind of like, I just rode the wave. And so that being said, even today, like I've started and stopped between like, I think about 15 different companies. It's really hard to find marketing channels that work. And, when you find a marketing channel, it's not ever guaranteed to continue to work. So like, basically what happened, and part of the reason why like I don't like to build in public, right? So part of the reason like this is my first podcast is like I like to fly under the radar. Like to date, I've the indie hacker world, like I've literally sold millions online by myself, or with a very small team of contractors. And it's one of those things that if you keep kind of talking out loud about it, people will start to copy it. And so even though I wasn't talking about it, people started to catch on, but luckily they started to catch on a little bit later. So basically I was the 3rd Warmup network that came out, and like full transparency, it was one of those things where I saw Lemless came up with a great concept, And I iterated significantly on that, provided many different features and many different proprietary, sets, like a proprietary algorithm on the back end to improve what like Lemlist did. And I just kind of honestly started to get scared, right? So like these Google ad, I was paying more per click. Revenue was not going down at all. If in fact, it was actually an exponential curve. And a private equity firm came in. Actually, I had a couple of different people come in and provide a couple of different offers. And this private equity firm that bought it, they're an amazing.
That was 11 months after the day you sat down and wrote the first line of code, right?
Yeah, it was like 11 or 12 months. Yeah, and it was one of those things that, at the time, I guess I'm 30, 31 years old, and I have all this PTSD from like being in credit card debt, and like basically 6 months before kind of going back to like, hey, like, what does your wife think about all this? 6 months before that, I was like, to my wife, Sammy, I'm saying, just give me one more year, and I'm like, we literally picked a date, and I was like, okay, if I'm not making 100 grand at this time, because and I was making more in sales, and that was just something that I significantly like. I had some good experience in, so I knew I can get a good job, and that was kind of always in the back of my mind, right? It was like, oh, if this all fails, like I can just go get a job. So we picked a date, and it was just one of those things that I got really lucky on. Granted, there was a lot of experiences leading up to it, but that's one thing that is tough, is like I'm part of the indie hacker community, which are these bootstrappers who are internet makers who don't raise a single fund. And a lot of the time they're engineers, but they don't have any marketing skills. And, it's one of those things where they'll just develop and develop and develop. And, it just took me 6 years to find something that worked. A lot of the time people give up after 6 months, 3 months, a year. I just kept going. That's really the only difference, I think.
You seen Alex West, the Get Cyber Leads guy?
That's right. Yeah, I have seen him on Twitter.
Yeah, he does some interesting stuff. I was looking. I tried his service. It's good info. It's good data if you're selling into private or recently VC backed companies.
Right.
It's a good product for the price point. He has. I was looking through some of the companies he started before, and one of them was called like Git Gardener. And basically it was like, it goes into Git and just like makes fake commits so that your Git commit history is all like lit up green. So if you're a developer applying for jobs, it's like you have like
that's awesome.
Totally green Git commit history.
That's pretty innovative, right?
I think that's work though.
That's part of the issue too, though, is like with a lot of these indie hackers is, that like that is an amazing concept, right? So unique. That will go viral for like a day on, say, Hacker News or something like that. But that is an idea that won't make any money. And so that's like, now I advise like a lot of kind of bootstrappers these days. And it's just one of those things where I'm just like, you have to have an idea that makes money. And to be honest, I fall into that trap all the time. So, since the sale of Warmup Inbox, I started Dabble Ventures, right? So like Dabble Ventures is a startup studio where we build new companies from scratch. So very similar to like, hey, I think there's an opportunity in the dog walking space. Like, let's just spin up an idea and see if it'll work. And we also buy companies as well. And for the companies that we start, we incubate with like founders. So for example, we're right now working in the Discord space. We're building like a no-code bot builder for Discord. And, on paper, everything lined up for like search metrics and, all these funnels. And, even with all the experience I have of like failing on certain companies and some work out well, it's one of those things that, you can have all the research behind you and it could still fail. So like part of the reason why I didn't realize is people on Discord just don't like to spend money, right? There's hundreds of other tools that are free. And it's just like, basically everything needs to go right in order for your startup idea to kind of take off. If one thing is off, generally speaking, it won't work. And so that's something I think about, all day long with kind of coming up with new business ideas.
So two other questions I want to ask you before we move on. I know you have some new stuff you're working on now. Don't know if you want to talk about it. I'll leave that up to you.
Sure.
But first question, can you give like, feel free to decline if you don't want to. Can you give like a rough order of magnitude of what the sale looked like for you on Warmup Inbox?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I can't share specifics, but revenue was over $1 million. Sale price was multiple millions, so life-changing money for me. And Warmup Inbox has, had thousands of users. And then the nice part is it's still growing, right? So the company that bought it, if you do some digging, you can find out who it is, but they're a very large private equity firm. They own many developer tools and cold email tools that you'll heard of. They also own they have like board seats of publicly traded companies on the New York Stock Exchange. So
Nice.
pretty big scale. And yeah, it was one of those things where, Warmup Inbox, like the way I like to describe it is Warmup Inbox is in a lot of people's eyes, a tool or a feature, not necessarily a company, right? But that being said, there's so many successful companies on the internet like that, and that's essentially, what I'm trying to build now. So,
Yeah, cool.
and yeah, no, that the team after went with them as well, and I stayed on for a number of months helping with the transition. And so, what's nice is, so I'm still working in the cold email space. I don't work in the warm up space anymore, but during my time at Warmup Inbox, I noticed that everybody had multiple mailboxes, right? That's kind of like, almost 80% of people actually use like more than one mailbox to send out emails. And literally there's no cold email tool out there that mainly focuses on this idea. Some can do it a little bit. And so I built a sender. So basically kind of, it's a little further backstream of kind of the cold email process of, building templates, sending out drips, organizing positive replies, things like that. That being said, I'm working with a separate private equity firm right now looking to buy companies, right? So, we're generally looking in the $1 million to 1.5, $5 million range of companies that are, in terms of revenue, might be an e-commerce company, another SaaS company.
You're doing that to like consult? Or are you getting involved in the fund or?
Yeah, so basically under Dabble Ventures, it really does kind of follow its name. We're kind of dabbling in a couple of different ideas, right? So we're starting new companies and buying new companies. And
Have you
mainly
seen Tiny Company?
well, it depends on the size, right? So
No, the Tiny Company. Tiny.
oh, exactly. So like Andrew Wilkinson is literally like my idol.
Yeah, okay.
So like it's on a smaller scale of like that. And so yeah, I mean, it's what I realize, like I've kind of touched every single part of like a business, accounting, customer support, sales, marketing, design. What I realize I love most is kind of scheming and designing products. And so, what I'm good at is building software and design, like kind of the UX UI. But part of the reason why Warmup Inbox did so well was because of the simplicity to use, right? 2 clicks and you were able to sync and get what you wanted out of the product. And
It's so funny you say that though, and you haven't picked up front end development yet.
yeah, well, the nice part is I've just find amazing front end developers.
Yeah.
So like kind of my superpower really is I'm decent at design and I know back end. So I just build out the endpoints and then I design the front end. And
why not just pick up like React or something?
It's just too much. Like, so part of like, to be totally honest, part of the reason I struggle with now is like shiny object syndrome, where it's just like, I love to learn, and like that is something that could be fun, but I also feel like that's a rabbit hole where, it's like those, you need 10,000 hours to be great at something. Like, I don't feel like doing that.
I was just talking to somebody today about focus. So touche, fair point.
I know. And so I'm still struggling with that, right? So like everything I described is in the software world, but yesterday I put in an offer to buy a very large vending machine company in Pennsylvania, literally like hundreds of vending machines. So like basically cool. If I find an opportunity that I think can make money, I will certainly look into it. But I guess more importantly, it's, what value can I add that basically on day one, whatever the buyer or whatever the seller, doesn't have, what can I add in? And so like literally with Warmup Inbox, like I had faults, right? So like the reason why many people wanted to buy Warmup Inbox was because they saw the opportunity, they saw kind of the foundation that I put in, but they were like, this guy me is not doing X, Y, and Z either right or not even doing it right. So the private equity firm that came in, they're doing an amazing job, and they brought in their expertise from even more years of experience to add more value, to make it a great investment on them.
Yeah,
And
they did not mess up the product. They raised the prices, but they didn't mess up the product.
yeah, and so it's just that much more valuable. And what one thing that I didn't realize when selling it, it's just such a big market and opportunity. So the nice part is it just worked out for everybody. For me, it's I didn't grow up with much money, and now I do. So it's one of those things where I just kind of needed to sleep at night.
I mean,
After
given
all
your
those
story,
years.
man, like
Yeah.
you're in your early 30s, like that was a hell of a freaking roller coaster ride. Like several times I got chills in my spine hearing your story, and I've heard the story before. So it's like, it still blows me away. And so to be able to cash out life-changing money, early 30s, I mean, you've probably got like, I'm going to guess you probably have like 4 or 5 more of these in your
Let's hope.
career.
Let's hope. That's one thing that keeps me up at night is like I don't want to be a one-hit wonder.
I don't think you will. You're not a one-hit wonder.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So going back to Byron, it's definitely like an imposter syndrome, situation where Byron, I sold Byron, for basically I got my money back on it. It was a good sale. But it wasn't life-changing money. It was basically like, hey, the last 4 years of my life was worthless, right? That's at the time, that's the way I looked at it. I was in so much credit card debt. I was like, I literally everything was maxed out. So that's why I sold it. I'm like, I need to start over. And yeah, it's just one of those things where that company now is doing significantly better.
I have a friend he's done 5 companies in his career. He says, like sports metrics, he says he's won 2, tied 1, lost 2.
Right.
So the 2 losses, obviously, him and investors lost money on the the closings of the businesses. They never achieved market fit. The tie is probably like Byron, where you just kind of like sell it at it, like just kind of return everybody's money and, no harm, no foul kind of situation. The 2 wins he had, the most recent one was big. It was a 9-figure exit, like upper 9 figures.
That's
so
pretty legit. Yeah. Right. And a lot of people say it only takes one. And, in my case, it does. Like now when I'm looking to like purchase companies, I'm more just like, okay, can I like a worst case scenario break even, and like say you can do that 10 times, like hopefully one of them will be a success. So yeah, now I'm mainly just trying to figure out, just kind of on the building side, like what works, what doesn't. The new company I started, Mail Stand, it is growing very quickly, not as quickly as Warmup Inbox, but a lot of the same mechanisms that I've seen work are working. So over the years, I've just figured out, okay, basically looking to see quickly what's working and what's not. And then if it's not working, stopping. But I mean, there is something to be said about execution, right? Like, there's a lot of different ideas I have come up with. Like, I don't know, I probably come up with a business idea once a week, like a legit business idea, and they have turned into like, billions of dollars. Like I competed with Scale AI early on, like, and that's worth $1 billion, like multiple billions of dollars. And when I say compete, I wasn't competing. It was more like we had the same idea at the same time.
you
And
see Jasper?
Yeah.
Dude, they are just insane. And it's not like they're using GPT-3, so it's not even like it's a UI on top of GPT-3. So like I'm sure there's like some really impressive engineering that goes into that, but it's not, like they're not building like the most amazing, algorithm ever. They're just leveraging GPT-3, and it's like all about UX, marketing, virality, like K factor, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time like post sale, I guess one, just like kind of getting back in shape and running. I'm doing the New York Marathon this weekend, so I'm looking like
Oh wow, man.
it's been years and years. Like I've been wanting to get back into running for 7 years, and I just like haven't had the motion to do it. But really, what I'm focusing my time on now is like what makes an idea like turnover, right? So like Jasper AI, like it was one person with an idea off technology that exists that literally anybody can use. Like what made that go from nothing to so much scale in a short amount of time? And really like
I
what I'm
forget the
focusing
guy.
on now.
There's three guys that started the company though. They had a story like you. Like they had a 10-year journey that
Right.
was like what you shared earlier here of like pivots, like 4 or 5 different companies, credit card debt, they were living in a studio apartment, the three of them sleeping on the floor or whatever. I'm like
Yeah,
paraphrasing.
I'm
I
not
think
familiar. Yeah, I'm not
it was a
familiar with it.
ridiculous story. Like it was a crazy story. It was an overnight success, 10 years in the making. Like they had a ridiculous story leading up to Jasper, and then Jasper just like took off like a
Right.
rocket ship. When they hit that one idea, it just took off.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was some sort of like wedge they had, right? So all I'm doing is like focusing on a wedge of just saying, okay, is the market big enough? What can you anchor in? And part of the struggle that I see with Mailstand now, which is like the cold email sending tool that I have, is there are some tools out there that have literally been building for 10 years. Like, how can I anchor in this space with just like a smaller set of features with like a solo developer? And something I didn't even mention, I started a data company while starting the lead generation agency. So in 2019, all this money I had, I invested $100,000 and to get $400 of revenue. So I scaled up a development team of like 4 or 5 people. I built the back end to save money, but it was like a huge team. I dropped $100,000. I launched, and I'm like, I got this. And literally, I made $400 in a whole year off this product. So I realized that like there were giants there. So like there is trying to find a balance between like what ideas can you bootstrap with no money or like your own versus like funding. And the issue was like the server costs were getting so expensive to maintain the data that I was crawling for this data idea. And I needed VC funding, but I didn't even go out to get it because I knew nobody would invest in it. So yeah.
I think we're getting to a good wrapping up point. I have one more question I'm dying to ask you. So,
Okay.
like your wife sounds awesome. She's been like through so much. Like both of you guys have been through so much on this journey, and then you're at this like awesome place now, and like who knows what's ahead. I'm sure you've got some really awesome things ahead. But what was the moment when you realized that it was working in a big way, and like what was that conversation like between you guys?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it was when we went viral on Twitter, or like the product went viral on Twitter. So it's like I knew the Google ads were working. And then yeah, basically like all like in a span of 4 hours, somebody must have got wind of it. And I think there were like 20 memes created about this product that I made. And it was like people were being like, who created this? Like people were like in the Wolf of Wall Street, Leonardo DiCaprio was like spitting money off the boat. Like people were doing all this, and I was like, oh wow, like.
And you were still like under the radar too. Like you don't really put your name on stuff.
Yeah, for the most part, right? I'll have kind of the Dabble Ventures logo on it. Mainly it's just kind of have like a facade over everything, just in case, like for example, we want to sell something off later. It's a lot easier to sell a brand than say like, hey, this was made by me. And so yeah, I think basically when it went viral, and then my wife came in, and I was like, check this out, and she's like, oh my god, like this is crazy. So it was cool to see.
Just like a sigh of relief, probably for both of you guys.
Yeah, honestly, I think the sigh of relief was just when all the credit card debt was paid off. And then I paid off my student loans like basically 1 or 2 months after kind of the company started to take off. And I was like, okay, I'm good. And I think I can start to make money. But I mean, I reinvested everything I had into everything just to try to make it work. So mainly the goal is just to work for myself forever. I went for a nice run at 1 p.m. today. I've always wanted to do that. Something I've always thought about. I'm like going to a meeting and I'm like, man, I want that job where I can just like run whenever I want in the middle of the day. And it's kind of what sparked it all.
Yeah. Well, this is a great closing note. Mike, this was awesome episode. This is going to be a really good one. We'll get this up in the next week or two. Thanks so much for coming on, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me on, man.
All right. See ya.
All right, bye.